Hey, stop. Come over here. Step off the porch and talk to me.
What's the reason? What happened?
I asked you to come here. Don't make this a thing.
I'm talking to you. I'm not stepping out unless you tell me what
We
you're
got a complaint. You don't look like you belong right here.
This is my home. What crime are you alleging? If I'm not detained, I'm ending the
Step outside
conversation.
now.
Racial profiling turned into a constitutional violation when patrol officer Kyle Mercer saw Andre Wallace, a black man doing yard work in an upscale neighborhood, decided he didn't look like he belonged, and approached his home as if Andre's presence needed permission. Mercer didn't come to ask questions or verify a call for service. He came to take control. He ordered Andre to step outside without explaining a lawful reason, and when Andre didn't comply, Mercer escalated the encounter into a forced threshold entry that the Ring camera captured with clear audio. What Mercer expected to be a quick intimidation check became an evidence-backed civil rights incident the moment he treated the front door like it wasn't protected by the Constitution. Before we jump in, tell me where you're watching from, state, city, or country. And if you like stories where people stay calm, hold their rights, and watch accountability catch up to power, hit like and subscribe, because this one shows exactly why cameras and composure change outcomes. Andre Wallace had moved into the neighborhood for the same reasons most families did: quiet streets, decent schools nearby, and a place that felt stable. He and his wife Tasha maintained their home. They knew the routine. People walked dogs. Landscaping crews rolled through. Homeowners waved from driveways. The neighborhood looked polished, but the social rules weren't always as clean as the lawns. On that afternoon, Andre was in his front yard handling basic yard work. Nothing out of the ordinary. No one was arguing. No one was running. The only shift in the environment came from a patrol car slowing down as it passed. Officer Kyle Mercer drove by once and stared longer than he needed to. He kept going, then circled back. That second pass wasn't subtle. He moved like he was confirming a suspicion he had already formed instead of observing a situation that required police involvement. Mercer parked and got out. His posture was the first warning. He walked up fast, direct, and squared up, like the outcome had already been decided. He didn't greet Andre like a resident. He approached him like a problem. Mercer's body language signaled that Andre's job was to comply first and explain later. Mercer ordered Andre to step toward him and come outside, away from the doorway area. He didn't clearly state why. He didn't reference a specific complaint. He didn't identify any crime. He treated the command itself as the justification. Andre didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult Mercer. He didn't posture back. He moved calmly toward his front door instead, not to flee, but to control the space and keep the interaction where the law was clearest. Andre stopped in the doorway. That doorway mattered. It wasn't just a physical boundary. It was the legal line between a public encounter and a protected home. Andre understood that, and his response showed it. He refused to step outside simply because Mercer wanted him to. He asked what the reason was, whether he was being detained, and what legal basis Mercer had for ordering him out. Andre also referenced the Fourth Amendment in plain terms. No warrant, no consent, no forced entry, no detention without a reason that could be explained and defended. Mercer didn't take the answer as a lawful boundary. He took it as a challenge. He leaned into authority language and pressure tactics. He framed Andre's refusal as uncooperative. He acted like officer safety required Andre to come outside, even though Andre was already standing still, in a doorway, hands visible, calm, and not threatening. Mercer tried to flip the roles so that Andre looked like the one escalating, even though Mercer was the one increasing intensity. Tasha Wallace heard it from inside and came into view behind Andre. She didn't come out to fight. She came out because she recognized the tone, and she understood what it could turn into. She stayed close enough to see everything and close enough for the microphone to pick up her voice. Her presence raised the stakes because now Mercer wasn't dealing with a lone person he could dominate with intimidation. He was being observed by someone who could later describe the encounter clearly, and the Ring camera was already recording. Mercer stepped closer to the threshold. Andre held his position. Andre didn't insult him. Andre didn't step out. Andre didn't get baited into doing something that could be reframed as resistance. He kept repeating the same central point. Mercer had not given a lawful reason for a detention or an order to leave the home, and Andre did not consent to Mercer entering the house. At that stage, Mercer still had options. He could have explained a legitimate reason if one existed. He could have requested verification without demanding Andre step outside. He could have called a supervisor and slowed the situation down. He could have left. Instead, Mercer escalated physically. He crossed the threshold line and used force at the front door area in a way that immediately turned the encounter from questionable to clearly unlawful. The Ring camera captured the movement and the audio, and it captured the context leading up to it, which is what officers usually rely on to defend themselves later. Mercer didn't just make a bad call. He made it after Andre gave him clear warnings, and after Tasha became an active witness. Tasha reacted immediately and called out what she saw, making it clear she understood that Mercer was trying to enter without legal authority. She demanded the situation stop and pushed for a supervisor. Andre did the same. He stayed controlled and refused to be pulled into panic, because panic would have given Mercer a story to tell. Neighbors began paying attention. Some watched from windows. Some stepped onto porches. The neighborhood's quiet shifted into that familiar tension where people pretend they're not watching while still watching closely. Mercer kept pushing his narrative. Compliance first, explanation later. Andre kept refusing to accept that order without lawful basis. Andre's focus stayed on two things: the boundary of the home and the record being created. When supervisors arrived, the tone changed quickly. They didn't walk into a vague complaint with no context. They walked into a scene that already looked wrong. A homeowner in his doorway, a spouse behind him, a patrol officer keyed up at the threshold, and a Ring camera directly capturing the whole interaction. Supervisors don't need a legal lecture to recognize liability when they see it. Andre proved ownership on the spot. He didn't argue about it. He produced documentation and identification in a straightforward way that removed any excuse for confusion. Then Andre disclosed the second fact that reshaped the entire response. Andre Wallace wasn't only the homeowner. He was a senior internal affairs supervisor with the county sheriff's office. That didn't make his rights more valid, but it changed how fast everyone understood the seriousness. Supervisors immediately recognized that Mercer had escalated on the wrong person, in the wrong place, with the wrong legal footing, and in front of a camera that would not bend to anyone's report writing. Mercer's posture shifted once he realized who Andre was. His confidence had been built on the assumption that Andre would fold, and when that assumption collapsed, Mercer had nothing solid to replace it with. Supervisors separated the parties and shut down the confrontation. Andre stayed in control of his home. Tasha stayed close. Mercer got pulled back. The interaction ended, but the consequences didn't. Andre and Tasha preserved the footage right away. They treated it like evidence, because that's what it was. The recording didn't rely on anyone's memory. It showed what happened in order, with clear audio, including Mercer's approach, his commands, Andre's refusal, and the moment Mercer crossed the threshold. By the time the department began trying to manage the situation internally, the key facts were already locked into video. The case wasn't going to hinge on who sounded more believable. It was going to hinge on what the camera captured. The department tried to keep it contained at first. That's what they always try to do when an officer creates a problem that doesn't come with an easy explanation. They logged the incident, collected initial statements, and put Mercer on a short leash while supervisors figured out what they were looking at. Andre didn't wait around for good intentions to turn into real action. He handled it like an investigator. He documented the timeline, saved the Ring footage in multiple places, and made sure it couldn't accidentally disappear. He also wrote his complaint in a way that didn't invite word games. Dates, times, what Mercer ordered, what Mercer failed to articulate, when Mercer crossed the threshold, what force looked like at the doorway, what Tasha witnessed, what the camera captured. Tasha backed him up on the human side of it. She wasn't focused on policy language. She was focused on the basic truth. A police officer came to their home because Andre didn't look like he belonged. And when Andre didn't obey a baseless order, the officer tried to physically push the situation into a detention and entry. Tasha made sure the department understood they weren't dealing with a misunderstanding. They were dealing with a pattern of thinking. Internal Affairs opened a case quickly, and it didn't stay at the surface level. Investigators pulled dispatch logs to see if Mercer had a real call for service, a bolo, or any legitimate reason to initiate contact. They pulled Mercer's body camera footage. They interviewed the supervisors who arrived. They also started checking Mercer's prior contacts in that area because departments know one thing. If an officer behaves like that on a ring camera, it's rarely the first time he's tried it. Mercer's report became a problem almost immediately. When officers write reports after a confrontation, they often rely on vague phrases to justify escalation. Suspicious behavior, refused commands, officer safety, aggressive demeanor. Those phrases can work when there's no video, because the public only sees the official narrative. Video changes that balance. The ring clip and the body cam made it harder for Mercer to hide behind broad wording, especially because Andre stayed calm, and the threshold entry was visible. The department placed Mercer on administrative leave while the investigation moved. That move wasn't a moral stance. It was risk management. They needed time, and they needed distance. Then the footage got out. It didn't spread because of a rumor. It spread because people could watch the entire sequence and hear it clearly. People saw an officer approach with a built-in assumption, issue commands without explaining legal grounds, escalate when challenged, and treat a private doorway like a space he could dominate. The clip also showed something else that always hits the public hard. Andre didn't do anything that justified the energy coming at him. He didn't run, he didn't threaten, he didn't mouth off. He stood in his doorway and asked for lawful reasons. Once it hit social media, the neighborhood context made it worse for the department. Upscale street, well-kept home, yard work, daylight. Everything that usually gets used to excuse police suspicion wasn't there. The only trigger was Andre himself. People reacted fast and loud. Comments weren't focused on technical legal terms. They focused on the obvious. Mercer approached Andre like he was trespassing in his own life. Then he tried to force compliance at the doorway. That's why the outrage stuck. It didn't require legal training to recognize it. Local activists started sharing the clip with context and timestamps. Community groups tagged city officials. Residents asked for Mercer's name and badge number. Some neighbors who had watched from a distance posted their own recordings from inside homes, adding angles that reinforced what the ring camera already showed. People started asking how many other times Mercer had done something similar without a camera directly in front of him. The department released a public statement. It was the standard language. They were aware of the incident. They were reviewing. They took concerns seriously. They couldn't comment on an active investigation. It didn't calm anything down. If anything, it made people more impatient because the video didn't look complicated. Andre and Tasha didn't chase internet attention. They let the facts speak while their legal team moved. A civil rights attorney filed in federal court. The claims were direct and built around the video evidence: attempted unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion, unlawful entry at the home's threshold, use of force without legal justification, and retaliation for refusing a baseless command. The lawsuit also targeted the department's failures through supervision and training, because the goal wasn't only to punish one officer. It was to force the agency to answer for how a patrol officer felt comfortable doing that in the first place. Once the lawsuit became public, the department's internal process started moving faster. Command staff didn't want depositions that forced supervisors to explain why Mercer thought step outside was a lawful order without any stated reason. They didn't want a federal judge watching video of a threshold entry and asking why this officer wasn't immediately stopped. They also didn't want discovery digging through Mercer's prior stops and neighborhood contacts. The public pressure added another layer. City council meetings got louder, county officials wanted updates. The department's union started positioning for defense while also trying to avoid being tied to the worst parts of the footage. Mercer's world narrowed. He couldn't patrol. He couldn't pretend this was a minor complaint. He watched his name become searchable. He watched strangers learn where he worked. He watched friends and coworkers change how they spoke to him. Some supported him quietly. Others backed away because nobody wanted their own careers dragged into it. Investigators interviewed Mercer more than once. They gave him opportunities to explain himself. The problem was that the key decisions were already on camera. The question wasn't whether something happened. The question was why he did it, and whether his explanations matched the reality of what he'd done. Andre stayed consistent the entire time. He didn't play to the crowd. He stayed factual. He emphasized the legal line Mercer crossed and why that line exists. He also made it clear he wasn't filing because of hurt feelings. He filed because an officer can't treat a homeowner like a suspect based on appearance, then convert that bias into physical escalation at a front door. By the end of the first phase of the fallout, the department faced two problems they couldn't solve with messaging: clear video evidence and a federal case moving forward with public support. And Mercer was about to learn the difference between being protected by a system and being sacrificed by it. The department didn't wait for a jury. Once their lawyers reviewed the footage, the strategy shifted from defending Mercer to limiting damage. They saw the same thing the public saw, but they also saw the part that matters in federal court. Mercer didn't just talk too aggressively. He escalated without articulating a lawful basis. And the moment he crossed that threshold, he stepped into a category of misconduct that's hard to explain away. Negotiations moved fast. Andre's legal team didn't rely on emotion. They relied on sequence and standards. They laid out the contact from the first approach, the lack of reasonable suspicion, the repeated order to step outside, the refusal grounded in basic constitutional limits, and the physical entry attempt at the doorway. They also framed the bigger issue. Mercer's conduct wasn't an isolated lapse if the department's training and supervision allowed him to treat a homeowner like that in a routine setting. The department settled a large portion. They didn't do it to be generous. They did it to stop discovery from digging deeper and to avoid a trial where every decision would be played in slow motion for a jury. The settlement included compensation for Andre and Tasha and formal terms that forced policy-level changes. The department also pushed public messaging about reviewing training and reaffirming standards because they needed to show the community they weren't ignoring it. But the settlement didn't end Mercer's exposure. The department's attorneys drew a line between institutional liability and personal misconduct. They handled the part that protected the agency, then left Mercer facing what wasn't covered. Andre's lawsuit pursued Mercer personally, for the remainder tied to his individual actions. That meant Mercer wasn't only dealing with administrative discipline. He was dealing with personal financial risks. That's when his life started collapsing in ways he couldn't control. Administrative leave became termination. Any chance of quietly transferring vanished because the video was too clear and too widely known. He started looking at decertification, which is career death in law enforcement. No certification, no badge. No badge, no steady paycheck. No steady paycheck. No way to keep up with legal costs that were rising every month. Mercer tried to fight it with the usual arguments. He framed it as split-second decisions. He leaned on officer safety. He claimed Andre was refusing commands. None of it solved the core problem. There was no lawful reason on record that justified what he did, and the doorway entry made it worse, not better. Then the criminal side landed. Prosecutors reviewed the same footage and the same reports. They didn't need a dramatic narrative. They needed elements that matched statutes. Unlawful entry, unlawful use of force. If Mercer's written account didn't align with the video, that opened another door for charges tied to false statements or misconduct in office, depending on how the case was built. Even if some charges were later reduced or negotiated, the process itself punished him. Court dates, attorney fees, loss of reputation, a permanent record trail. Mercer's finances broke first. Legal bills stacked. He burned savings. He borrowed. He sold things. The kind of backing people think officers always have didn't show up the way he expected, because support gets quiet when the evidence looks bad. He fell behind. Credit collapsed. Stress spilled into every part of his home life. His family felt it fast. His partner had to absorb the consequences of his choices without having made them. Arguments became routine. Plans got canceled. Stability disappeared. If they owned a home, the payments became a fight. If they rented, renewal became uncertain. Even basic things like keeping a car insured and maintained turned into pressure points. The badge had been his identity and his security, and once it was gone, the rest of his life had nothing solid under it. The department didn't protect him. They couldn't. They needed to show the public and the court that his actions violated training and policy. That's what agencies do when they're cornered. They isolate the officer, point to the manual, and claim he went off script. Mercer became the example they used to keep the institution standing. Meanwhile, Andre and Tasha didn't leave their neighborhood. They kept their routines. They stayed visible. They didn't shrink to make other people comfortable. They also didn't turn into internet celebrities chasing attention. They moved like people who knew the truth was already documented, and the system now had to respond to it. The reforms came in layers. Supervisors implemented stricter rules around knock-and-talk contacts. Officers had to articulate lawful reasons early, on camera, not later in a report. Training emphasized threshold limits and entry standards. Supervisors got clearer authority to intervene when an officer escalated without justification. The department also reviewed Mercer's prior contacts, because the community demanded to know whether this was a one-time incident or a pattern. Andre turned the footage into a training tool. He didn't use it to humiliate Mercer. He used it to show mechanics. He broke down the choices, the legal line at the doorway, the escalation pattern when a citizen asserts rights, and the way officers sometimes treat compliance as the only acceptable outcome. He made it practical. What to do differently, where to stop, when to call a supervisor, how to avoid turning bias into action. His message stayed consistent. Cameras don't create misconduct. They reveal it. And once it's revealed, outcomes change. That's the part a lot of people don't like to admit. Without the ring recording, Mercer's report could have shaped the entire narrative. With the recording, the narrative stayed attached to reality. In the end, Andre and Tasha kept their home, their dignity, and a record that forced accountability. Mercer lost his job, faced criminal consequences, and watched his finances and family stability collapse under the weight of choices he made in broad daylight, in front of a doorbell camera, over an assumption. Here's the moral that sticks. Authority isn't a license to invent suspicion, and just comply isn't a legal standard. Calm, boundaries, and documentation win against ego most of the time, because courts and investigators can't argue with clear evidence. What would you have done if an officer ordered you out of your own home with no lawful reason? Would you have stepped outside just to end it, or held the line like Andre did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more real accountability stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Step back from the drawer.
Hands where I can see them.
Officer, what's wrong?
Shut up and do what I said. You don't get to question me.
He's on shift. He's the one who
Ma'am,
does
don't get
deposit.
involved.
It's literally our routine. Ask anyone here.
Look at the deposit log. Turn around. Put your hands behind.
A quiet June morning at Maple and Rye Bakery flipped fast when shift lead Caleb Marquez stood behind the counter, counting a cash drawer for a scheduled deposit, and his manager decided it looked like stealing. Trent Halpern called police without checking the schedule, without checking the camera feed, without asking the staff in the room. Officer Ryan Kessler arrived, keyed up and treated the bakery like a crime scene. Basic verification never happened. Minutes later, Caleb stood in handcuffs while customers recorded and coworkers froze, scared to make it worse. Tell me where you're watching from, state or country. And if you watch stories about power getting exposed by simple facts, recordings, and accountability, hit like and subscribe. People only start filming when they feel the system won't slow down on its own. Now, back to the start. Maple and Rye ran on routine. Morning rush, regulars, espresso machine going, staff moving with muscle memory. The deposit process wasn't secret, it was scheduled. The drawer count happened in the open, logged, then sealed for a mid-morning bank run. Caleb was 19 and already a shift lead. Not a title they handed out for fun. He handled keys, counted registers, signed the log, and kept everything clean enough that nobody had to fix it later. That morning, he followed the same steps he always did. Drawer out, bills stacked, deposit slip ready. Trent walked in tense. That was normal for him, too. He liked control, and he hated seeing someone else touching money, even when policy said that person should be doing it. Instead of asking what Caleb was doing, Trent jumped straight to accusation. His voice rose enough that people at the front tables looked over. Caleb didn't match the volume. He kept his hands visible and explained he was counting for the scheduled deposit, that his name was on the posted schedule, and that he could show his employee ID right away. Trent didn't take the ID. He didn't look at the schedule. He didn't ask the nearest coworker who was watching this unfold. He pulled out his phone and called the police like he wanted the situation to harden into something official. That call set the tone. Officer Kessler arrived quickly and walked in with the posture of someone expecting a suspect, not confusion. He saw Caleb near the open drawer and locked onto it. The apron, the name tag, the way staff moved around him like he belonged there. None of it slowed the officer down. Caleb complied immediately with commands. No arguing, no sudden moves. He kept repeating the same request in plain language. Verify that he worked there. Check his ID. Check the posted schedule. Ask the staff. Pull the bakery's security footage. Kessler didn't do any of it. Trent positioned himself like the only reliable narrator in the room. He repeated the theft claim and leaned into the authority of the uniform. Meanwhile, a coworker tried to speak up and confirm Caleb's role. Another employee pointed toward the back, where the camera system sat. Kessler shut that down and treated it like noise. Here's the thing. When an officer refuses to verify obvious facts that are right in front of them, the situation stops being about mistakes. It turns into choice. Kessler moved in, grabbed Caleb's wrists, and cuffed him behind the counter, tight enough that Caleb's shoulders tensed. Customers stared. Several lifted their phones and started recording from their seats and near the doorway because the escalation didn't match what they were seeing. Caleb didn't resist. He stayed controlled and kept repeating he was complying while asking, again, for the officer to confirm his employment and review the video that would clear him. Kessler ignored it and walked him out through the front entrance. That walkout did real damage. It wasn't just removal. It was humiliation in a public place, in front of people who'd seen Caleb working there before, in front of strangers who'd only remember cuffs. Trent watched from the doorway. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Just the posture of someone satisfied that the officer was doing the dirty work. Kessler put Caleb in the patrol car and drove him to the precinct without ever checking the schedule, the ID, or the footage. And that decision, skipping the simplest verification, was about to turn one manager's accusation into a case that would force every camera, every report, and every witness statement into the light. The patrol car ride didn't change the story Kessler committed to. He treated it like a simple chain. Manager accused, suspect detained, paperwork next. That's how bad arrests stay alive. Not because they're solid, because nobody slows down. At the precinct, Caleb walked in still cuffed, still calm, still repeating the same point he'd said in the bakery. He worked there and the cameras would show it. He didn't switch tones. He didn't beg. He stayed on facts. Kessler moved him through intake like the outcome was already decided. He talked to the desk, gave the basics of the accusation, and framed it as clean. Theft call, detained on scene, no mention of refusing to check ID, no mention of ignoring the posted schedule, no mention that multiple people offered to verify employment. That's the chess move right there. If you skip verification and write the report like you did it, you're building cover before anyone asks questions. Caleb asked to have his cuffs adjusted because they were tight. Kessler brushed it off. He asked again to show his ID and asked again for someone to pull the bakery video. Kessler didn't take the bait. He kept moving. Then Desk Sergeant Miguel Santos looked up. Santos had been at that desk long enough to read people fast. He didn't just see a kid in cuffs. He saw the details that didn't match the energy. The bakery apron still on, flour smudges the way Caleb stood like someone used to being on shift instead of someone caught running. Santos asked the quick questions Kessler should have asked in the first 2 minutes. Where Caleb worked, why he had the drawer open, who else was there, and what exactly was verified before cuffs went on. Caleb answered in order. Shift led, scheduled deposit, posted schedule, security cameras, coworkers willing to confirm. He also pointed out that customers recorded the whole thing. Santos didn't accept Kessler's version on faith. He asked Kessler whether he checked ID or schedule or footage. Kessler defended the call by leaning on the manager's statement and the scene he walked into. That defense sounded routine, but it didn't sound responsible. Santos knew the difference. He had Caleb's property brought up for inventory because that's a normal step, and it put Caleb's identification in front of him without any drama. Name, date of birth, address, Marquez. That last name landed. Santos had seen it before, not on a suspect sheet. In the news and around the courthouse. Federal Judge Elena Marquez didn't keep a low profile in the legal community, and local law enforcement knew who sat on the federal bench in their area, even if they didn't socialize with them. Santos looked at Caleb again, then back at the ID, then at Kessler. The room shifted. Not because anyone suddenly cared more about right and wrong, because now there was a high chance someone with real power would demand receipts. Here's what mattered next. Santos didn't start making friendly calls. He didn't try to quietly undo it and pretend it never happened. He did the opposite. He started asking for documentation. He told Kessler to hold his body cam as evidence, not treat it like a personal file. He asked for the call notes. He asked whether the bakery footage had been requested. He asked for the names of employees on scene. Small steps, but those steps are how you stop a bad story from becoming the official story. Caleb requested a phone call. Santos allowed it. Caleb called his mother. Caleb. He didn't deliver it like some threat. He didn't lean on her title. He laid out what happened in plain order. Deposit count, accusation, refusal to verify, cuffs, public walkout, arrest. Judge Elena Marquez didn't respond like someone trying to rescue her son from consequences. She responded like someone hearing a constitutional problem with clean evidence attached to it. First move, preservation. She told him to write down names and times while it was fresh. She told him not to argue the facts with officers. Just keep repeating the verification points. Then she got counsel involved immediately, the kind of lawyer who didn't play for apologies. Within hours, formal preservation demands went out. Bodycam, dispatch audio, booking footage, store surveillance, witness contact info, anything that could accidentally disappear once people realized how bad it looked. That move cornered everyone, because now it wasn't just a kid saying he worked there. It was a paper trail forcing the department and the bakery to lock down evidence before anyone could reshape the story. Kessler still acted like he'd done nothing wrong. Trent still expected his call to be treated as gospel. Neither of them seemed to understand what was about to happen once the footage got reviewed frame by frame. Judge Elena Marquez didn't treat it like a family emergency. She treated it like a civil rights incident with a clock running, because evidence disappears when people get nervous. Her attorney moved first on preservation. Formal letters went out to the police department, the city, and the bakery. Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch audio, holding room video, booking area video, store surveillance, point of sale logs, the deposit log, employee schedule records. Anything tied to that morning locked down immediately. That move forced everyone to pick a lane, cooperate and produce, or stall and look guilty later. On the police side, the department couldn't pretend it was routine anymore. Internal review opened fast, not because they suddenly loved accountability, but because they understood exposure. Bodycam got flagged. Supervisors got involved. The city legal office got looped in. At the bakery, the owners got hit with the same reality. Their manager had called police on a shift lead in front of customers. Now lawyers wanted the footage and records. If they didn't preserve it, they'd be part of the problem. Caleb's case also hit the prosecutor's desk. The charge decision couldn't wait for vibes. It needed facts. That's where the verification issue came back like a boomerang, because Kessler had almost nothing besides Trent's accusation. Caleb got released later that day, not because anyone apologized, but because the case wasn't clean enough to hold him without questions. He left with a receipt for his property, red marks on his wrists, and a phone full of messages from coworkers and customers. People already knew. Video clips were already circulating. Here's what made this different from the usual online outrage cycle. This didn't stop at a post and some comments. A federal civil rights complaint got filed the same day, aimed at the officer's actions and the department's failures. The filing wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was leverage. It forced timelines, disclosures, and consequences. Once that paperwork landed, the department had to preserve everything and review it like it would be shown in court, because it would. Then the footage got pulled. Store cameras first. The bakery's angle showed Caleb doing what he said he was doing. He moved like someone working, not someone sneaking. He followed the deposit routine. Coworkers drifted in and out like it was normal. Nobody acted like they were watching a crime unfold until Trent decided it was a crime. The security video also showed what Trent didn't want seen. There was no frantic scramble, no attempt to pocket money, no hiding. It was a count, a logged task. Bodycam next. Kessler's camera caught the biggest problem. Caleb repeatedly offered verification options, and Kessler chose not to take them. Caleb tried to show identification. Caleb pointed out the posted schedule. Staff attempted to confirm his role. The camera system was visible. Kessler didn't check. That wasn't an accident. It was a decision. The body cam made that impossible to deny. The department compared Kessler's report language to what the camera captured. The gaps stood out. The report framed the scene as clear enough to justify immediate custody. The footage showed a workplace with multiple easy verification routes that got brushed aside. Witness statements stacked up behind the video. Customers described the moment as sudden and unnecessary. Coworkers described Caleb as the shift lead on duty. Several people described Trent as angry before police even arrived, already committed to treating it like theft instead of a workplace check. Then Trent's story started to crack. When investigators asked him basic timeline questions, his answers didn't line up with the store's records. The schedule contradicted his "he shouldn't have been there" angle. The deposit procedure contradicted his "nobody counts like that" angle. The camera contradicted his "I saw him taking it" angle. That's when the owners started asking their own questions, the ones they should have asked before a 911 call. Why did Trent jump straight to police? Why did he refuse to check internal records? Why did he push the officer to treat it like a crime in progress? Another issue surfaced during the records pull. Trent had problems of his own, not a vague personality problem. Operational issues, money handling issues, complaints, gaps that looked a lot like mismanagement and a lot less like a young employee suddenly deciding to rob the place in the middle of a shift. That mattered because it changed the motive. A false report isn't always confusion. Sometimes it's a shield. Sometimes it's a way to redirect attention. Kessler still had a choice at the start, and he still owned it. Trent's accusation didn't force Kessler to ignore ID, ignore the schedule, ignore the cameras, and ignore witnesses. Kessler did that on purpose. And once the department saw the footage, they had a second choice: admit the mistake and take the hit, or double down and risk turning one bad arrest into a career-ending scandal and a settlement. They didn't get to delay that decision for long, because the lawsuit had already started pulling everything into the open, and the evidence was already telling one story. Caleb acted like an employee doing his job, Trent acted like he needed someone blamed, and Kessler acted like verification was optional. Once investigators pulled the footage and lined it up with the reports, the department lost the ability to frame Caleb's arrest as a reasonable misunderstanding. The store cameras showed a normal deposit count happening in the open, with coworkers moving around Caleb like he belonged there because he did. The Bodycam captured him offering the fastest ways to clear it up: ID, schedule, coworkers, security video, while Officer Ryan Kessler brushed past every option and escalated anyway. Trent Halpern's accusation stopped looking like a good faith mistake the moment records and timestamps started contradicting him. Internal affairs didn't need speculation. They had a clean sequence of decisions. Kessler arrived, treating the scene like a crime in progress, accepted the manager's word as the only source worth hearing, ignored witnesses standing within arm's reach, and never made the basic check that would have ended the call. He cuffed a working employee, walked him out through the front in front of customers, then documented the incident in a way that didn't match what the cameras captured. That gap mattered because it wasn't a missed detail. It was the story he chose to lock in. The city's attorneys saw the same thing and understood the risk. A federal civil rights case with clear video doesn't turn on who sounds confident. It turns on what the officer refused to confirm when it was easy, immediate, and available. The department stopped treating Kessler as defensible. He was removed from patrol, his actions were formally sustained as violations of policy and judgment, and his credibility became unusable for prosecutions. That's how careers end in real life, quietly through files and decisions that follow an officer everywhere. Trent's side collapsed even faster because the bakery's own systems didn't support him. Once ownership got involved, they pulled the schedule, deposit procedure, and store logs, then compared them to his account. His version didn't fit. The security footage didn't show theft. It showed routine work. Under scrutiny, other problems around Trent's conduct and money handling choices surfaced in a way that made the original call look less like concern and more like control. He got terminated, and the bakery cut ties hard, because keeping him would have meant accepting the legal and reputational damage he triggered. Caleb didn't walk away feeling saved. He walked away knowing he'd done everything people claim prevents escalation: calm tone, compliance, clear requests to confirm facts. And it still didn't protect him until oversight got forced to look. The desk sergeant, recognizing the last name, Marquez, exposed something uncomfortable. The system moved faster once it realized the consequences could land in a courtroom with no room for excuses. Judge Elena Marquez didn't make private calls to smooth it over. She treated it like a constitutional issue and used the only language institutions reliably respond to: preservation demands, filings, and deadlines. The resolution followed that pressure. The city moved towards settlement because the evidence was ugly, the arrest was avoidable, and a trial would have broadcast every frame. The outcome included significant compensation for Caleb and attorney fees, but the lasting impact came from the changes attached to the case. The department tightened procedures around workplace theft calls, where the alleged suspect claimed employment, added requirements for supervisors when readily available video or workplace records existed, and strengthened rules that required officers to consider quick exculpatory checks before putting someone in custody. They also had to address restraint practices and documentation, because the footage made it clear how small choices stacked into a public violation. Maple and Rye didn't escape clean either. Regulars saw the walkout, staff saw how quickly a manager could weaponize police, and the business took the hit in trust. Ownership adjusted their cash and deposit procedures to reduce single-person vulnerability and made it explicit that internal verification came first. Schedule, Idaho, cameras, and a second staff confirmation before any police call. None of that fixed what happened to Caleb, but it reduced the odds the same play could happen again. The case became a public example for a reason. It showed how ego and bias can erase basic process, and how the minimum standards, check the ID, confirm the schedule, review the video, aren't optional just because someone in authority feels certain. Caleb didn't win because of status. He won because evidence got preserved before it could be buried, and because the recordings forced everyone to confront what they didn't want to admit. So here's the question to sit with. If the name Marquez hadn't been recognized at that desk, how long would it have taken for anyone to do the simplest checks? How many people never get that review because nobody with power demands it the same day? Drop in the comments what you would have done if you were Caleb. Would you have stayed controlled? Or would you have snapped once it was obvious nobody intended to confirm the truth? Share this with someone who still believes accountability automatically shows up on its own. And if you want more story times where recordings, oversight, and receipts force authority to answer for what it chose to do, subscribe.
Hey, step back from the vehicle.
Sure. What's going on?
Oh, is that your BMW?
Yes, it's registered to me.
How'd you get a vehicle like this? You don't look like an owner. What are you doing here?
I'm here for a scheduled meeting in that building, and I'm incoming chief of police. This is your last mission.
Racial profiling collided with basic verification when a patrol officer walked up on a black man in a tailored suit beside a black BMW SUV, treated the scene like a theft in progress, and kept pressing even after the man offered documents that should have settled it. The officer's body cam captured the posture, the tone, the escalation. People nearby noticed too, because nothing pulls attention like a uniform turning a quiet parking lot into a public accusation. Where are you watching from? Country or state? Drop it in the comments. If you watch stories where calm, documentation, and oversight expose bad conduct like the video and subscribe, because this one flipped fast. Here's how it started. The parking lot sat beside an upscale office complex, the kind with glass walls, security cameras, and polished entrances where belonging gets judged in a half-second glance. Cars came and went all morning. Most drivers blended into the environment, so nobody asked questions. Adrian Whitfield didn't blend. He pulled in early, parked the BMW, and stepped out wearing a fitted suit. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't hiding. He stood near the driver's side door, checked his phone, and looked like someone waiting for a meeting inside the building. Officer Kyle Brannon rolled through on patrol and locked onto the image like it explained everything. He didn't start by running the plate from a distance. He didn't check with building security. He moved straight toward Whitfield, with his body cam already recording, shoulders tight, face set, ready to figure it out in the worst way. Brannon skipped the normal human opening and went straight into suspicion. He challenged whether the SUV belonged to Whitfield. He pressed for an explanation before he asked for anything that would actually verify ownership. Whitfield responded like a professional who understood procedure and didn't want a scene. He stayed calm. He told Brannon the SUV was registered to him. He offered his ID and the registration immediately. That should have ended the contact in under a minute. Brannon didn't let it. He treated cooperation like a trick. The officer didn't move toward confirmation. He kept moving the goalposts. He ordered Whitfield to step away from the vehicle, increasing distance like he expected trouble. Then he demanded the key fob, not as a reasonable request to verify entry, but as a control move, something that kept Whitfield in a prove-it position. Whitfield complied anyway, hands visible, movement slow, documents ready. No argument because he understood what a lot of people learn the hard way. The moment you match an officer's emotion, you stop being seen as a person and start being treated like a problem. Brannon still acted like none of it added up. He pushed questions that didn't connect to the plate, the VIN, or the registration. He focused on why Whitfield was there, why he was dressed like that, why he was next to that vehicle at that location. The questions had a pattern. They weren't designed to confirm facts. They were designed to imply Whitfield didn't belong. Meanwhile, the environment changed. A couple office workers slowed near the entrance instead of walking straight inside. A person sitting in a nearby car turned their phone toward the interaction and started recording. A security guard watched from a distance, not intervening, just clocking the dynamics. Brannon radioed dispatch to run the registration, but he didn't wait like someone expecting the system to clear it up. He kept the pressure on. His tone stayed sharp. His posture stayed confrontational. He acted like the paperwork was just another obstacle to his suspicion, not the answer. Whitfield kept it tight and factual. He didn't over-explain. He didn't plead. He repeated what mattered. The BMW was his. The documentation matched, and he was there for a scheduled meeting inside the building. Brannon's suspicion shifted in a way that told on him. At first, he treated it like a stolen vehicle situation. Then, when Whitfield stayed composed and the documents lined up, Brannon's focus moved off theft and onto something uglier. Whether a man like Whitfield could realistically own a vehicle like that in the first place. That's where the stop stopped being routine. Because once an officer looks at a person and decides the problem is their existence in that space, verification turns into theater. The goal isn't truth anymore, it's saving face. And Brannon was clearly headed toward a statement he couldn't take back once it left his mouth. Brannon should have slowed down once he had Whitfield's documents in his hand. He went the other way. He held the license and registration, glanced at them, then kept Whitfield in the same prove yourself box, like nothing had been produced at all. Control stayed the point. Distance stayed the point. The key fob stayed the point. Whitfield stayed where Brannon told him to stand. Hands visible. Voice even. He didn't negotiate the scene. He tried to end it with facts. Brannon acted like facts were optional. He kept asking for explanations that didn't connect to the vehicle record check, who Whitfield was meeting, why he arrived early, why he was dressed like that, why he was standing by the driver's side door instead of walking inside. None of it changed whether the BMW was stolen or not. It only changed how much Brannon could make Whitfield feel out of place. That's the chess move right there. Not show me proof. More like, talk long enough until you slip. Whitfield didn't slip. Dispatch came back with the basic confirmation Brannon claimed to be waiting for. The plate returned to a registered owner matching the documents. Insurance active. Address consistent. Nothing popped that justified the temperature Brannon brought to the interaction. A reasonable officer would have pivoted to closure. Quick apology. Clear the scene. Move on. Brannon didn't close it. Pride kept it alive. His suspicion shifted in real time. Theft didn't hold up, so he leaned into something harder to disprove. The idea that ownership itself didn't make sense. He started implying Whitfield didn't look like someone who could afford that kind of vehicle. Then he said it more directly, with a comment about how cars like that usually didn't belong to people like Whitfield. He didn't say it as a joke. He said it like it was an obvious truth, and Whitfield was supposed to accept it. Another jab followed, aimed at status, Like Whitfield didn't look like the type who owned a Porsche either. Same message, same direction. Wealth plus blackness couldn't compute in Brannon's head, so he tried to make the math Whitfield's problem. That's when the parking lot's mood changed. People nearby stopped pretending they weren't watching. One office worker slowed down and stayed put. Someone recording from a car held their phone steady. A security guard didn't step in, but he didn't look away either. When an officer starts talking like that in public, everyone understands what they're hearing. Whitfield didn't explode. He didn't perform outrage for the crowd. He didn't give Brannon a reason to pretend the issue was attitude. He tightened up instead. Whitfield kept his answers short. Ownership was documented. Registration matched. He was there for a scheduled command transfer meeting inside the building. Nothing about that required debate in a parking lot. Brannon pushed again anyway. He repeated instructions. He kept Whitfield away from the vehicle. He held onto the key fob demand like it was leverage. The whole thing turned into a contest over who got to define reality, even with dispatch already confirming what Whitfield said from the start. That's the part people don't always understand about stops like this. Once an officer ties their ego to suspicion, verification stops being the goal. Saving face becomes the goal. Backup arrived before Brannon could fully spin it into something worse. Officer Lena Park pulled up and read the scene fast. A calm man in a suit, documents already out, Brannon running hot, bystanders watching, cameras likely rolling. Park didn't add drama. She asked for the basics and got the basics. Then she noticed what Brannon seemed determined to ignore. Whitfield wasn't acting like someone trying to get away with something. He was acting like someone waiting for the system to catch up to the truth. Whitfield made a decision right there, and it wasn't about winning an argument. He reached for a different kind of proof. Whitfield stopped trying to convince Brannon, because that game never ends. He shifted to verification that didn't depend on Brannon's mood. Whitfield identified himself as Commissioner Adrian Whitfield and stated he was the incoming chief of police, there for a scheduled command transfer meeting inside the building. Then he produced municipal credentials that matched that claim. No theatrics, just official ID that carried weight. Brannon didn't accept it cleanly. He hesitated. He kept that same skeptical posture, like the idea was impossible on its face. Officer Lena Park treated it differently. Park understood what was happening in real time. The stop had already drifted out of a normal lane, and it was happening in public, with cameras nearby. Credentials like that weren't something you debate in a parking lot. You verify them through dispatch and supervisors, fast, proper, documented. Park took the lead on the radio and requested confirmation through dispatch. She didn't frame it like a challenge. She framed it like procedure. Dispatch didn't take long. The response came back clear. Adrian Whitfield was the newly appointed chief of police, arriving that morning for a scheduled command transfer meeting at that office complex. The details lined up with what Whitfield had been saying from the beginning. That confirmation changed the air instantly. Brannon's posture shifted because now the suspicion didn't just look wrong. It looked reckless. The officer had moved from a vehicle theft check into personal commentary about who should own luxury cars. And he'd done it while his own camera was running. Whitfield didn't rub it in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture back. He just held position. Then the building's front doors opened and command staff stepped out. The timing made it unavoidable. They weren't walking out randomly. They were walking out because they were expecting Whitfield, and the meeting was real. They approached him, greeted him formally, and saluted him in front of the lot. No confusion, no hesitation. That rank reversal became visible to everyone watching. It landed hard. Bystanders weren't guessing anymore. The security guard wasn't neutral anymore. The people recording didn't stop recording. Now they had context. The officer on the scene had been profiling the department's incoming chief in broad daylight. Brannon tried to reset the interaction. He tried to soften his tone and slide into a routine check explanation. It didn't fit what the camera already captured. It didn't fit what witnesses heard. It didn't fit the earlier escalation. Whitfield responded with the same calm he'd kept the entire time, but he made the line clear. He framed the issue as verification versus profiling. He made it clear that registration confirmation should have ended the stop, and the rest was conduct, tone, assumptions, and the decision to keep pushing after facts were confirmed. That's when the scene stopped being about the BMW. Now it was about the officer. Sergeant Mateo Ramirez arrived as the situation turned into a visible leadership problem. Ramirez didn't argue in the lot. He didn't hold a roadside debate. He watched, listened, and took control like a supervisor who understood liability and standards. Ramirez flagged the body cam footage for review on the spot. He treated the incident as a conduct issue that needed formal documentation, not informal excuses. Whitfield didn't announce punishments in public. He didn't give a speech. He let the moment speak for itself. Before he walked inside with command staff, he delivered one point that didn't need volume to hit. When verification confirms what someone told you, continuing the stop turns into something else, and everybody can see it on camera. The parking lot cleared out, but the problem didn't. Inside the building, Whitfield kept the schedule. The command transfer meeting still happened. That mattered because it showed discipline. He didn't let Brannon's conduct hijack the day. He also didn't pretend it was no big deal. Sergeant Mateo Ramirez handled the next step, the way supervisors are supposed to when something goes sideways on camera. He documented the incident as a conduct review, not a vague miscommunication. He secured the body cam file, tagged the key moments, and noted the presence of witnesses. Park's radio traffic and dispatch confirmations went into the timeline too. That created a clean record. What Brannon saw, what he chose to do, what facts were available, and how he behaved after those facts came back. Brannon tried to frame it as a standard suspicious vehicle contact. That explanation couldn't carry the weight of what he actually did. The escalation didn't match the evidence. The language about who usually owns certain cars pushed it out of the good faith mistake lane and into bias and professionalism. Within the first week, Whitfield didn't make it a public spectacle, but he didn't protect it either. He ordered an internal investigation and treated it like a first-day test of standards. Not just for Brannon, for the whole department. If the new chief watched this slide, everyone would learn the real rules. Say the right words in policy, then do whatever you want in the field. So Whitfield did the opposite. Brannon got placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Ramirez and professional standards pulled the full footage, dispatch logs, and statements from Park and witnesses. Building security provided camera angles from the lot. The bystander video that circulated online helped too, not because it replaced the body cam, but because it showed how the encounter looked from the outside. A calm man being treated like he didn't belong, in a place where belonging gets policed quietly until a badge makes it loud. Park's role stood out in the review. She didn't pile on. She didn't co-sign the attitude. She verified the credentials properly and used dispatch the way it's meant to be used. The department recognized that difference because it showed the problem wasn't policing is hard. The problem was choices. The community reaction came fast. People weren't shocked that profiling happened. They were shocked it happened to the incoming chief on his first day in broad daylight with cameras running. Local groups raised it at city meetings. Office workers who witnessed it talked about it at work. A simple question kept popping up. If this is how an officer talks when he doesn't know who he's dealing with, how does he talk when no one important is watching? Whitfield didn't answer that with a speech. He answered it with process. The investigation ended with discipline that matched the conduct. The department treated Brannon's comments and escalation as violations of professionalism and bias standards. The exact outcome depended on policy and prior history, But the direction was clear. Brannon couldn't keep working the street the same way after that footage. The city also faced exposure on the civil side, because when an officer turns a consensual contact into an extended detention without real grounds and adds profiling language on top, attorneys don't need to spin anything. The camera already did the work. Whitfield made department-wide changes immediately after. He reinforced a simple operational rule. Suspicious vehicle contacts required articulable facts, not vibes. He required supervisors to review a sample of Bodycam footage weekly from patrol, not just when a complaint hit the desk. He tightened guidance on requests like key fobs and step-away orders, making officers justify those moves with a safety or investigative reason that made sense on paper and on video. Then he addressed the culture piece without pretending a memo fixes culture. He told his command staff to stop treating bias complaints like PR problems and start treating them like performance problems. Officers who couldn't handle professional neutral verification didn't need better excuses. They needed retraining, removal from certain assignments, or separation. The standard wasn't whether the officer felt suspicious. The standard was whether the suspicion was real. A month later, the parking lot incident still floated around the department, but not as gossip. It became an example Whitfield's trainers referenced in roll call. How quickly an officer can create liability, how easily ego turns a basic check into misconduct, and how cameras don't care about intentions after the facts are in. Whitfield didn't pretend he was immune either. He used the moment to underline something uncomfortable. Status didn't protect him from profiling. Credentials just changed how fast the truth got acknowledged. That was the lesson he wanted the public to see. If someone like him could get pressed like that with documentation in hand, anyone could. The difference was what happened next. Oversight, records, accountability. So here's the question for you. If you were Whitfield in that lot, calm and compliant, and the officer still kept pushing after dispatch, confirm the registration, what would you do next? Drop your take in the comments and share this with someone who thinks just comply always ends it. And if you want more real grounded stories where receipts and recording bring consequences, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Hey, let me see some ID.
What's this about?
Stand up, we're gonna talk outside.
I can talk right here. What did I do?
We got a call, you match what they described.
What description? What crime?
Shut up and stop arguing and do what I'm telling you.
I'm not arguing. I'm asking why you're demanding ID.
Racial profiling hit a wall the moment a patrol officer walked into a packed downtown cafe, zeroed in on a black man sitting alone, and demanded ID without stating a lawful reason. The man stayed seated. He kept his hands visible. He didn't raise his voice. He kept asking the procedural questions that force an officer to pick a lane. Was he being detained? What was the specific reason? And was he free to leave? The officer escalated anyway, trying to turn a vague check into control. Quick pause. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch stories where, calm, documentation, and clear boundaries beat pressure tactics, like and subscribe. Now rewind. It was a weekday morning downtown. The cafe had the usual rush. People in line, laptops open, drinks getting called out, staff moving fast. Security cameras sat in plain sight, one at the register, one covering the seating, another near the entrance. The kind of setup that makes it hard for anyone to later claim something happened that didn't. Malik Johnson was there, like he often was, early, quiet, alone at a small table near the wall. Laptop open, coffee in front of him, phone face down. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't filming. He wasn't pacing or acting erratic. Just existing in a public place. Officer Grant Mercer came in wearing full uniform. He didn't enter like someone grabbing a drink. He scanned the room like he was shopping for a target. He noticed Malik and walked straight over. Mercer stopped at Malik's table and started the contact with that vague, controlling tone officers use when they want a person to start explaining themselves. He asked for ID right away. No introduction that mattered. No clear reason, just a demand. Malik didn't argue about feelings. He didn't tell a story. He asked the first question that matters. Was he being detained? Mercer didn't answer cleanly. He repeated the ID demand and acted like Malik was being difficult for even asking. He framed it as a simple request, like the reason wasn't important. Malik asked again, slower. He stayed seated. Both hands stayed on the table, visible. Mercer's posture tightened. His voice sharpened. The language shifted from, I'm asking to, I'm telling. He ordered Malik to stand. He insisted Malik identify himself. He implied consequences if Malik didn't comply. Malik didn't move fast, he didn't stand. He asked for the lawful basis. He asked if he was free to leave. Mercer still wouldn't name a reason that held up. He reached for the usual vague lines someone called. He matched something. It was suspicious. Nothing specific. Nothing that explained why this man at this table right now needed to produce papers. People around them started paying attention. A couple customers stopped typing. Someone in line turned fully toward the table. A woman in a booth angled her phone in a way that looked like scrolling, but the lens pointed toward the scene. Staff noticed too. The barista kept working but kept looking over, tense. Elena Park, the manager, caught it fast. An officer looming over a seated customer. A demand for ID. No clear explanation. The imbalance was obvious, and it was happening inside her business, on camera. Elena walked over and addressed Mercer in a controlled, professional way. She asked what the issue was, and what lawful reasons supported the demand. She kept her voice level and made sure everyone nearby could hear the question. Mercer didn't like being challenged in public. He kept focusing on Malik, like Elena wasn't supposed to be part of it. He pushed the idea that Malik had to comply because he said so. Elena didn't let it stay private. She pointed out the security cameras and stated that the footage would be preserved. Then she told Mercer she was calling for a supervisor to come to the cafe. That changed the temperature. Mercer's confidence didn't vanish, but his approach shifted. He started talking like he needed to justify what he'd already done. He tried to keep Malik in the box of non-compliant without ever answering the basic questions Malik kept asking. Malik stayed consistent. Same posture, same controlled movements, same questions. He wasn't performing for the room. He was building a clear record. And now the officer wasn't just dealing with Malik. He was dealing with witnesses, cameras, and a manager who understood exactly what needed to be saved. Mercer didn't like the manager calling for a supervisor, so he tried to regain control the way some officers do, by speeding things up. He shifted closer to Malik's table, lowered his voice, and acted like this could still stay between them if Malik just gave him what he wanted. It didn't work. Malik kept his hands where the whole room could see them. He kept asking the same core questions, detained or not, reason or not, free to leave or not. Mercer kept dodging the clean answer and kept treating Malik's calm as defiance. Elena didn't play along. She stayed near enough to be part of the scene, far enough to avoid any claim that she interfered. She told her staff to keep working and to not touch the security system settings. Then she did the smart thing. She wrote down the time on a notepad near the register and added a quick description of what she saw. Officer entered, approached one customer, demanded ID, escalated without stating a clear reason. Mercer keyed his radio. Everyone heard that tone shift too. He asked for a supervisor to respond, but he framed it like he was dealing with a non-compliant subject, not a customer sitting in a cafe. While they waited, Mercer tried new angles. He turned his attention to Elena and pushed for the cafe's video. Not a request through channels, not a formal process. He wanted it handed over right then, like the business owed him evidence on demand. Elena shut that down without theatrics. She made it clear she would preserve footage. She wouldn't hand it over informally. She also made sure witnesses heard her say it. That mattered. At the same time, a customer in the booth kept recording. Nia didn't point her phone like a spotlight. She kept it low. She captured the audio in the space. Mercer standing, Malik seated, Elena present, customers watching. Malik stayed focused. No insults, no sarcasm. He didn't try to win the crowd. He treated the situation like it would be replayed later by someone who didn't care about Mercer's tone. Only facts. Minutes passed. Enough time for the room to lock into attention. Enough time for Mercer to realize he couldn't force a quick submission without doing something that would look bad on camera. Sergeant Ramirez walked in with that supervisor pace. Not rushed, not casual either. He saw the crowd first, then the table. He read the room in one glance. Officer looming, customer seated, manager nearby, multiple phones out. Ramirez didn't start by scolding anyone. He started by getting Mercer away from Malik's face. Small repositioning. A few steps. Space created. Mercer went first, of course. He tried to set the narrative before anyone else could. He told Ramirez he had a reason to identify Malik. He leaned on vague suspicion language. He suggested a complaint. He hinted at a description match. Ramirez asked for specifics, not the category. The details. What description? Who called? What behavior? When? Mercer didn't have clean answers. He had impressions. He had vibes. He had the kind of story that sounds fine until it has to match timestamps. Ramirez then spoke to Malik, still keeping distance and keeping it calm. Malik described the sequence in plain order. Officer approached, demanded ID, refused to state a lawful basis. Escalated when Malik asked if he was detained. Malik made it clear he hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't blocked anyone, hadn't refused to leave a private property. He had simply asked procedural questions and stayed seated. Elena added what she observed from the business side. She stated Malik was a customer, the cafe hadn't called police, and the cameras covered the entire incident. She also stated she would preserve the footage and provide it through proper channels if requested. Now, Mercer had a problem. Ramirez couldn't justify a detention off a foggy explanation in a room full of witnesses, not with cameras overhead, not with bystanders recording, not with a manager ready to document and preserve. Mercer tried to push one last claim, that Malik's refusal to provide ID created the suspicion. Ramirez didn't bite. That logic collapses fast when the original demand never had a lawful basis. Ramirez ended the contact. He instructed Mercer to step back and disengage. He didn't make it a big speech. He didn't need to. The decision itself said enough. Mercer backed off, but he didn't look relieved. He looked irritated. He walked out like someone already rehearsing the report he planned to write. Malik didn't celebrate. He stayed steady and did the next smart thing. He asked for the supervisor's identifying information and the incident reference. He also made sure Elena knew he wanted the footage preserved, not edited, not clipped, not overwritten. Elena moved immediately. She noted the exact time the supervisor arrived and the time Mercer left. She pulled the camera system menu and marked the block of footage for export. She also asked 2 customers, including the woman in the booth, for their contact info in case the department tried to claim there were no witnesses. By the time the cafe settled back into normal noise, the record was already forming. Body camera, security footage, witness, video. A clean timeline written down while it was fresh. Mercer still had his badge. He still had his authority. He also had a shrinking space to invent. By lunchtime, the cafe moment had already turned into paperwork. Malik didn't wait a week to cool off. He wrote down a timeline while it was still clean in his head. Arrival time, where he sat, when Mercer entered, when the supervisor showed up, when the officer left. He kept it factual because that's what survives later. Elena moved fast for a simpler reason. Most camera systems overwrite. Days pass, footage disappears, and then everyone argues about memory. She didn't let that happen. She pulled up the camera playback, grabbed the full-time window around the incident, and exported the video from the angles that covered the entrance and Malik's table. She kept the original system recording intact and saved a copy outside the system so it couldn't get lost by accident. The witness video mattered too. Nia sent Malik the original file, not a compressed social media clip. She kept her own copy. Same with another customer who had recorded a few minutes from a different angle. That afternoon, Malik filed a complaint with the department and requested the body-worn camera footage tied to Mercer and the supervisor. He also requested the dispatch record for the supposed call that Mercer had implied justified the contact. If there was no call, that would show up. If there was a call, the details would have to match what the officer claimed. A few days later, Mercer's written report landed in the system. It tried to make the whole thing sound tidy. A suspicious person check, a lawful demand for identification, a refusal framed as non-compliance. The report leaned on broad language that sounds fine until you compare it to time-stamped video. Then the footage got reviewed side by side. Security video showed Mercer walking in, scanning the room, and heading straight for Malik without talking to staff first. It also showed Malik staying seated while Mercer stood over him. The witness recording captured the tone shifts and the repeated demands that the report smoothed over. Body camera later filled in the gaps. Mercer had pushed the ID demand before he had articulated any specific reason, and the supervisor had pressed him for details he couldn't clearly give. The mismatch was obvious. One more problem showed up soon after. The report changed. Not a spelling correction, not formatting. The justification language shifted, and the sequence got cleaned up. Details that had been vague became more specific after the video existed. Edits don't always mean misconduct, but edits that move a report closer to what cameras show raise a different question. Was the report written from memory, or was it written to survive review? That's when the issue stopped being only about a bad contact. Now it was about reporting integrity. Internal Affairs opened a case. The department tried the standard containment approach at first. Treat it like a complaint. Interview a few people. Close it quietly. That strategy didn't work here because the facts didn't rely on opinions. 3 angles told the same story. The paper didn't. The dispatch side didn't help Mercer either. The call justification didn't line up cleanly with what he'd implied at the cafe. Staff statements undercut it too, because the cafe hadn't called for Malik and nobody had reported him as a threat. Once an officer's credibility starts wobbling on video, other parts of the system notice. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, supervisors who don't want their unit dragged into it. People start asking a practical question. If this report doesn't match the footage, what about the last 10 reports? A public defender recognized Mercer's name and asked for discovery in a separate case. Then another attorney did the same. It wasn't about Malik anymore. It was about whether Mercer had a pattern of vague suspicion language and aggressive identification demands that weren't supported by clear, lawful reasons. The unit got uncomfortable fast. Malik kept the pressure in the most boring way possible: documentation, follow-ups, and copies. He didn't argue on social media. He didn't rely on going viral to force action. He stayed inside the process while keeping his own record of every submission, every response, and every delay. And the more the department tried to treat it like a minor customer complaint, the more the contradiction between video and reporting kept pulling it upward. Because once the story becomes the report got adjusted to fit the footage, you don't just have a profiling problem. You have a trust problem that touches cases, courtrooms, and oversight outside the department. The department tried to close it like a normal complaint. Quick interviews, a polite email, maybe a reminder about professional conduct. That approach works when it's one person's word against an officer's. This wasn't that. Malik's complaint package had a clean timeline. Elena had security footage from fixed cameras. Nia had a witness recording with clear audio. The department had body camera. 3 separate sources lined up on the same sequence. Mercer walked in, targeted Malik, demanded ID, escalated without stating a clear lawful basis, and only shifted once a supervisor and cameras became the center of the scene. Internal Affairs could have still tried to bury it, but the report edits made that dangerous. Because once Mercer's report history showed meaningful changes after the fact, the story stopped being officer made a bad call. It became, did an officer manipulate a narrative? And that triggers a different level of concern inside a department. It also triggers attention outside it. Malik didn't threaten anyone. He didn't grandstand. He did something more effective. He requested records through formal channels and kept copies of everything he submitted and everything he received, including timestamps and version history. The first outside pressure point hit the department through the courts. Defense attorneys started asking for Mercer's Bodycam and report histories in unrelated cases, not because they cared about the cafe, because credibility is evidence. If an officer's reports don't match video in one incident, it becomes fair game to question his reports in other incidents. Prosecutors hate surprises like that. Judges hate it even more. That forced the department's legal unit to look at the situation with a risk lens instead of a PR lens. Then it got worse for Mercer's side. A pattern review began inside the unit. It started small, pulling a sample of Mercer's stops and matching them against available footage, CAD logs, and reports. That's when the same habits showed up repeatedly. Broad suspicion language, thin or generic reasons for detentions. Reports written in a way that made the officer's actions look more justified than what audio and video suggested. At that point, Internal Affairs wasn't the end of the line. It was the start. The case got referred upward. City oversight. Then state-level civil rights reviewers. Then it reached federal review through the same pathway these cases usually travel when integrity and documentation are in question. Civil rights enforcement interest, evidence handling questions, and whether there's a pattern inside a unit. That didn't mean helicopters and raids. It meant emails, subpoenas, and structured interviews. It meant data pulls. It meant policy and training documents requested. It meant the department's leadership getting asked questions they couldn't answer with slogans. Mercer's personal accountability came in layers. First, the department restricted him. Less discretion. Less contact-heavy assignments. Then formal discipline landed once the investigative file hardened. The footage contradicted the report, and the edits made it look like the report had been shaped to survive review. Then the big consequence hit that Mercer didn't control. His credibility became toxic. Once prosecutors decide they can't safely rely on an officer's testimony, the officer's job changes. Court testimony becomes a liability. Cases get dismissed or renegotiated. Old convictions get challenged. The department starts doing damage control, not for one incident, but for every file his name touched. That led to wider case rechecks, stops, searches, arrests. Any situation where Mercer's narrative was the foundation. Some cases held up, and some didn't. Enough didn't that the department had to admit the review publicly. The department's statement tried to keep it general. They framed it as commitment to transparency and continuous improvement. Standard language. The public didn't focus on the statement. They focused on the video. Because the video showed the simple truth. Malik sat in a cafe and got treated like a problem that needed explaining. The officer couldn't articulate a lawful basis until the moment got supervised and recorded. Malik's outcome wasn't just, they apologized. He got a formal finding that the contact was improper. He got written confirmation tied to the complaint process. The city settled his civil claim to avoid the risk of a trial centered on conflicting reports and verified footage. The amount wasn't the headline part of this story. The accountability was. Elena's Cafe changed procedures too. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they saw what works. They posted a visible policy. Staff do not provide customer information without legal process. They trained employees on who to call and how to document incidents without escalating them. They upgraded camera retention so footage didn't vanish in days. They kept a logbook for major incidents with timestamps and witnesses. Malik didn't walk out thinking the world was fixed. He walked out knowing something specific. Calm plus documentation can beat pressure tactics. That's the real lesson here. Not courage as a performance. Not yelling, not chasing a viral moment. Control your body language. Keep your hands visible. Ask the questions that force clarity. Make the official story collide with recorded reality. Preserve the evidence early, get witnesses, get times. Make it impossible for someone to clean up the narrative later. If you were sitting in that cafe watching this happen, what would you have done? Would you have recorded? Would you have stepped in like Elena? Or would you have looked away and hoped it ended fast? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who thinks recording doesn't matter. And subscribe if you want more stories where the facts don't bend just because someone has a badge.